So I went and I thought to myself, all right, Sam Darnold played the Houston Texans last night. And Baker played the Houston Texans last week. Now, Sam was at major disadvantages. Baker played the Texans at home. Sam played them on the road. Sam has an awful offensive line. Baker has top one or two offensive lines. That matters for quarterbacks. Sam not only was on the road, it was a short week, a Thursday night game on the road. Those are tough on road teams. Sam also lost his best player, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, his star running back, right? Early second quarter. So despite all those, I went and looked at 3 or 4 things that matter. I went and looked at first downs between the two. I went and looked at passing touchdowns, yards, completions, passing first downs, and third down. And, oh, what do you know? Sam threw for more yards and more yards per completion and had 50% more passing first downs, and his third down passer rating, same defense. Sam actually had a worse offensive line. Sam actually lost his star running back. Sam was actually on the road. Sam was a short week. And Sam's numbers pretty impressive. Isn't that interesting? And by the way, this is no indictment of Baker Mayfield, but it is interesting, isn't it? When Baker the first 2 years didn't have any support, he was awful. He led the NFL or second in interceptions. He called out the medical staff. He was embarrassing. He was a mess. He got a little plump. It's one of the reasons they haven't paid him yet. I'm not quite sure I can handle success. And he was terrible. Then he got a really good coach and a really good offensive line, and now Baker wins games. And Sam was really terrible last year in New York and the year before, with a bad coach and a terrible O-line and bad receivers and no running game. So what does it all mean? It means when Sam and Baker both get a good coach, both get some weapons, pretty good. They can win games. And neither is good enough to overcome crap. Andrew Luck is about the only guy that can in the last decade. That is it. And Sam's not as good as Andrew Luck. He's big like Sam. He played in the Pac-12 like Sam. He's athletic like Sam. Doesn't throw as good a ball. Is not as good pre-snap. And Baker Mayfield's not Andrew Luck either. That both of these quarterbacks, neither one's an A prospect. Neither one can overcome nonsense. But I will say this for Sam Darnold. As of this morning, we looked. Baker has the third best pass blocking line in the league. Sam has the 31st after last night. And I want to throw this out. Now, so Baker, Sam is all your preference. If you live in Cleveland or Ohio, you're a Baker guy. If you live in Carolina this morning, you're a Sam guy. I've always been more of a Sam guy. He's a bigger athlete. He's a stronger athlete. I think he's more mature. So I would go Sam, but not a lot of difference here, right? But here's the one thing. I went this morning and looked at this. Because we all know what I'm about to say is obvious. It really helps Mac Jones because he's got a really good offensive line. It really hurts Trevor Lawrence because he has a bad offensive line. The reason the Browns are going to beat the Bears this week is Justin Fields has a bad offensive line. The reason Trey Lance may succeed early is the Niners have a good offensive line. Offensive lines dictate to a huge percentage your coach, and your offensive line dictates to young quarterbacks how things are going to go. I went and looked at the 10 lowest graded pass blocking teams according to Pro Football Focus. One team has a winning record. Sam Darnold in Carolina. And the only other teams on this list that you're pretty sure are going to have winning records are the Bills, the Chargers, and the Ravens. And the reason being Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Justin Herbert. So for those who still fall in the Sam Darnold's no good, only team with a bad pass-blocking offensive line with a winning record, one in the league, Sam Darnold. He's not Andrew Luck. He's not great. Sam put the ball on the carpet twice last night. But he throws a good ball. He's big, he's strong, he's athletic, he's coachable. And now that he can play with a lead, with some weapons, and a pretty good coach, it's amazing. Pretty amazing, right? We all want to bury these young guys. Let it bake. Matt Rule, terrific young coach, much like Kevin Stefanski. Stefanski's terrific. Matt Rule knows more football than you do. I know it's hard, Ohio guy. He knows more football than you. He sought Sam Darnold. Listen to him. He likes Sam Darnold. Not saying he's great, but given at least some of Baker's advantages. You saw the numbers. They played the Texans 2 weeks. I don't see the big gap like everybody else. All right, so this is interesting. Alex Guerrero was, of course, Tom Brady's trainer. And, boy, he came out. And, next week, Tom and Alex and the Buccaneers go to New England and play Bill Belichick and all those guys. It's a big game next week. So Alex Guerrero called out Bill Belichick. Woo-wee! He says it was like Bill never really, I think his emotions or feelings never evolved with age. I think in time with Tom, as Tom got into his late 30s and early 40s, Bill was trying to treat him like a 20-year-old kid that he drafted. And I think that was such a Bill thing. He never evolved. You just can't treat someone in their 40s like somebody in their 20s. It doesn't work. I'll get to that later. But it is interesting. Albert Breer, who was on our show this week, who's lived in that area, has covered the teams, had an interesting perspective on why Guerrero is throwing out bombs a week ahead of the big game. Let me give you my belief, my theory on what could be happening. I don't know this to be true, but it's my guess. Tom Brady now has a net worth, along with his wife, of almost $700 to $800 million. When you get to be that big, LeBron's in that category, there's a handful of Americans, men and women who are, you get into protection mode. Even when you get enough to retire, your stockbroker says you don't need home runs, just hit doubles, right? Tom now doesn't need a lot of home runs. He really doesn't need any doubles. But it's protection mode for the TB12 brand, his legacy. Bill Belichick, by the way, doesn't need any more Super Bowls either. Does not need to win another playoff game or a division. But he is the greatest football coach ever, and losing season without Tom does him no good. I think what you're seeing now, and we've seen 3 major books in the last 18 months. I've read 2. They're all excellent. The Dynasty by Jeff Benedict, read it. It's Better to Be Friends, Seth Wickersham, going to read it, have it. Ian O'Connor, terrific writer. Belichick, Making of a Great Football Coach. We have officially, folks, moved into the framing of the dynasty stage. Both sides now have to protect their brands and future earnings and legacies and revenue and reputations. And so Guerrero, just knowing how New England has historically, as Albert Breer said, leaked stories to protect Bill and the organization, gets a little ahead of it, throws out a little stink bomb just to let you know. And we're aware of what you do. By the way, I saw this happen in Hollywood several years ago. There was a terrific book by James Miller called The CAA. It's the creative artist agency. Joy and I work in the world where we need representation, and at different times in our life have perhaps been represented by them. They represent many TV and radio people and athletes. And the creation of it by Michael Ovitz and Ron Meyer, and then they had a divorce, and they were both very successful, but there was a little tour, and they wrote the book, and it was fantastic, and you shouldn't read it, but it was... You're making sure both sides wanted their story told, and you're framing and earnings and reputation and legacies, and this is what happens to very successful people, companies, CEOs, brands, entrepreneurs. So I think we've got 3 great books out there. I've read 2 of them. They're fantastic, but as you read the books, you can kind of tell what side's talking, what side's feeding, what side's giving, what side's taking, and this is the game, of course. You know this. It's the game behind the game. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.